One of the things that you said that struck me was also when you talked about his family and how one of the reasons why he never went back to office was because he wanted to be with his family.
Yes,
President Jacob Zuma, when speaking, announcing the death of former President Nelson Mandela, expressed gratitude to the family.
Yes.
It would seem that the family also tends to pay a huge part of the sacrifice when you have someone as heroic and as iconic as Nelson Mandela.
Indeed.
Do you want to talk a little more about that?
Nelson Mandela's family, starting from the first wife, Winnie.
Oh, Winnie wasn't his first wife. There was another woman.
There was, yes, the one, okay, yes, they did. There was another woman and they divorced. That was right. I think the son was from that woman. Then Winnie, then Graca Michelle. I think those women are exceptional women. They probably paid the greatest sacrifice after Nelson Mandela, because you can imagine holding the home front and your husband is, out there trying to do something that you have no choice but to believe in with him because he's your husband. That's the way he wants to go. It's his life. Probably after you, nothing else matters to him again beyond that. Not even what we call quality time with the children. So there was a downtime of 27 years in child bringing, in parenting and what have you, which these women were able to anchor and hold the fort and probably play the roles he would have played. They were daddy, they were mommy. I can imagine Winnie running out of excuses to explain to children where their dad is.
She even had to take on a political role as well.
Exactly. Of course. There's no way she can divorce herself from it. Going to visit him, telling him everything that is happening at home, keeping him abreast, coming back, talking to the children. She did that for 27 years. So we have no gainsaying that behind every successful man is a woman. So family-wise, believe you me, the children also pay the price. The wife paid the price. So did the man.
Do you also, do you feel for the children? Because, when you die in the shadow of such a great man, it definitely puts a huge responsibility on you to live up to,
yes, indeed,
his own standard as well.
Yes, indeed. That's the inspiration we're talking about. That as I speak to you, there are 1 million young children now who will become Mandelas in the waiting. Somebody may be opportune, a little boy. I saw some children placing flowers somewhere, and that is going to impact him greatly, and he will say, look, I'm either going to be like this man or I'm going to be better. Less is not acceptable. Down the line, the children, the grandchildren and the great-grandchildren have an onerous task of either meeting up their father's records and antecedents or rubbishing it by exceeding, but they cannot fall below it.
Well, yes, I think because now I'm even amazed that even a Nigerian student in the UK in Sussex is saying that they also have a Mandela Hall in the university.
Indeed.
So as you rightly put it, looks to us that truly he's a world-class leader that actually is borderless, irrespective of where he's from, and no one has ever said anything about the continent. They all see him as a leader irrespective of where he's from. Now, before we continue with Captain Umar Aliyu, let's look at some of these comments from world leaders concerning the death or the passing of Nelson Mandela, and you're getting to see what the former South Africa's last white president has said about his death. De Klerk as a great unifier and a very, very special man in this regard beyond everything else he did. And of course, David Cameron, a great light has gone out in the world. Nelson Mandela was a hero of our time. You also have Hollande, President Hollande, the president of France. Nelson Mandela made history, that of South Africa and the whole world, just the way he put it. So it's not about South Africa now. They're talking about humanity,
Yes.
making history in the world. Now, going back to the issue about the youth, you talked about the youth being the best of dreamers, and they too can also actualize all of that. We also saw Nelson Mandela in his clique then. They were all young South Africans, young people, young students. How were they able to keep that kind of dream alive? We're trying to look back home and see what we can really do when we keep talking about peer pressure.
Yeah, peer pressure. You see, one thing is, if you look at human beings, we are social beings. Okay, we just respond or react to our environment. If a doctor says you are reacting to a drug, it means you're not doing well. And if he says you are responding, it means you're doing well. So human beings, we are just responding or reacting to our environment. Now, talking about our youth, we discovered that the youth actually are that bracket, that age bracket within which we are most productive, we are most aspiring. From toddlers, you know, from children, babies, you go into that middle range, youth, then onto the other twilight years, if I can put them that way. I tell you something about the youth and leadership. Okay, the moment we find ourselves in an environment that is conducive, we tend to respond to it. Let's take a microcosm of what I'm trying to say. Your son believes daddy is a superpower. All I have to do is to tell daddy and he will do it. He can't understand why you won't give him that bike, because he believes you can go bring that bike. The same thing happens as he grows. When we become youths, we revere our elders. Even though we are now men, we work, we still tend to see them in a more matured version of how your son sees you. So there's a chain effect. It goes up and it comes down. If your son sees you doing something, it's absolutely correct, and he's going to just go do it regardless. So if you do dangerous things before your son, he's going to imbibe it. The same thing happens between the leadership and the led. The moment a leader does something in a particular way, the led will imbibe it. That's why I say we are social beings. We just respond or react to environmental circumstances as they occur. So it's apt for leaders to become showpieces. Leadership is not an easy thing. You are a 24-hour, point of focus. Everything you say, the way you say it, the way you walk, the way you speak, everything you say is meant to be a showpiece.
And I realized something again, because we just talked about, mentioned some of the others, Steve Biko, Walter Sisulu,
Exactly.
and Nelson Mandela.
Exactly.
And also, if you also read the books and history of great presidents, even President Obama, we're trying to talk about how they were able to prepare themselves for leadership. Now, it didn't just come upon them by surprise.
Yes, indeed.
They seem prepared.
Yes,
and if we
indeed.
look at this bunch of young South Africans, Mandela inclusive at that point in time, they were never deterred or derailed. They had a vision.
They had a vision indeed.
And it came to pass.
It came to pass. You see, a vision itself is, let's look at it this way.
Because I'm asking this because
Yes.
do we really get that training or that preparedness towards leadership?
We don't at the moment. And as I'm trying to tell you, it's a sociological thing. Politics itself is not just, is not just an all commerce avenue. Politics is supposed to be a process. You shouldn't just wake up tomorrow and find yourself running a state when you've never done anything like that before. Politicians should be groomed. Politicians should be nurtured. And the nurturing process itself should have morality as the nucleus, the middle. Then it spreads out. But today we don't seem to have that here. We have people in office who probably do not have an inkling of what the professional, the political, and the moral demands of the office is. So we see a lot of things happening that leave a sour taste in the mouth. These things are being imbibed. There are two things about youth. At a point in time, when the youth believe you are not leading them exemplarily, they get disillusioned. When they are disillusioned, they set adrift. Whoever catches them at that moment anchors them. So Our leaders can inspire us by doing things in ways that a young boy will actually look at you and say, when I grow up, I want to be like Uncle Nyota. For just one thing you did right today, you have inspired him.
But what if that example is not there? Like the Mandelas, the others who fought for the freedom of South Africa. I mean, the leaders were not showing them the example.
Yes.
But they carved out an example or a path for themselves.
If you observed, when Mandela and his people came up, there was a white leadership in South Africa, okay? And they started fighting for freedom, equality, justice, and all manner of attempts were made, both monetary attempts on their lives. A lot of things were put in their way to dissuade them from taking that line of action. But they stood fast. Beyond that, they achieved that dream. Mandela could have decided he wants to stay there and perpetuate himself. Nobody would have said no. But I tell you, what he has done even makes him more popular and leaves a more positive effect.
Just give us a moment. I'm trying to also look at some of these other comments from other world leaders. The biggest personality of the 20th century, that is from Dilma Rousseff, the president of Brazil, and one of the most honorable figures of our time, Prime Minister of Israel. And we actually watched Mr. Obama live yesterday. We'll talk glowingly about Nelson Mandela, whom he has also painted as he's a hero personally. He said he has achieved more than could be expected of any man.
Indeed.
That is huge.
Indeed.
Because one of the things that you said just before we went there was, how this could be overwhelming.
Yes,
you look at the tributes, and then you're thinking to yourself, how can any man live up to this type of standard? And you just said something as to how it's the little things that we do.
Indeed.
That count the most. That count the most. Talk a little more about that.
You see, when you want to impact people, it's not about those big things you do. There are little things you do that leave a very loud impression of who you are. And I still relate again to soft force. There is a way you speak to someone with a soft voice and you will appeal to his soul, to his conscience. It's not every time you have to actually go ha-ha. It's not every time we have to go violence. Okay? If you look at the late Nelson Mandela and Desmond Tutu, you are going to see some very great exponents of what I've just mentioned. They go about doing little things that bring people and endear those people to them. Call it humility if you like. Call it selflessness if you like. Okay? Greatness is not really achieved by being loud, by being brash. But you can achieve greatness by being quiet. A very good example of this is Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi overwhelmed a much greater force by using what you call passive resistance. Don't fight. I read a book about him where the Indians sat on rail lines and policemen came with batons and started hitting them. So they lined up in their thousands and took turns to be hit until the policeman couldn't raise his hand again. Well, if you think hitting us can achieve it, let's go out. So it's about, it's about time in our world. We see a lot of wars going on, a lot of resistance, a lot of dying. These people are what you can call starlights that are holding a light out to humanity. Nelson Mandela is probably the latest or the most current starlight the world has had. Many have come and gone. Mother Teresa was one. Mahatma Gandhi was one. There are so many. Nelson Mandela was also one small starlight. And he was holding a light to say, hey, let's go the road less traveled. The road less traveled is about peace. We don't need to fight. It took me 27 years, yes, but I got there.
Well, Captain Umar Aliyu, would like to thank you so very much for coming on Sunrise Daily. Well, it happens that we're supposed to be talking about security. Coincidentally, you say Nelson Mandela has been your hero, and we're so happy to have you here with us in the studios, talking glowingly about this man, having read his books, having followed his times.
Thank you.
And we'd like to thank you so very much for finding time to join us this morning.
Thank you very much.
Well, he's a security consultant and also a retired Army captain. So I still takes a moment, and we will return. Stay with us.